Kamala Harris has done nothing about this. She should apply diplomatic and economic leverage over the Chinese to stop manufacturing this fentanyl, which then comes into the Mexican drug cartels, which they then ship into our country.
The United States has designated some of these groups
this is a
and pressed
scandal.
the Chinese government.
Oh, we could do so much more. Fentanyl is not easy to manufacture, Margaret. And if Harris was applying proper leverage to the Chinese and to the Mexican drug cartels, we would not have so many people dying of fentanyl overdoses.
How do you do that? What's your vision of how you do that?
I think you walk into Beijing, you talk to Xi Jinping, and you say your entire economy is going to collapse unless you get access to American markets. You need to take this fentanyl seriously, or we are going to impose serious tariffs and economic penalties for not following our laws and not helping us stem the flow of this deadly poison.
I think there's something to that. I don't know if it's just as easy as walking into Beijing, though, and telling Xi Jinping that this is what's going to happen, because I don't know if that's necessarily the way to do it. I also think it's weird that no one has asked in the media about the Harris-Walz tickets connections to China. That's what's so weird to me. There has not been, and I was looking over the weekend, there hasn't really been any deep dives into this at all. And Walz and Harris haven't sat down to answer any questions about any of this. So I just think it's weird that a guy that purposefully selects to get married on the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, that's messed up. Okay, that's weird. Let's bring in that's weird. I didn't even mean for that. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 20. Our good friend Stephen Yates, who is also the great adjudicator of what is weird as it pertains to China. You can follow him on X at YatesComs, and he's senior fellow at America First Policy Institute, as well as chair of the China Policy Initiative. So I wanted to get, first off, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the whole ticket. I find it strange that there hasn't been a greater interest from our press, just on the basis of self-preservation alone as a nation, that we have someone who might be maybe as compromised, if not more compromised, than the first son with a geopolitical foe in this vice presidential pick. And I think it further highlights Harris's, complete inability to make proper judgments.
Yeah, well, I think there's an unspoken rule out there that the media, the broad mainstream, has adopted, that they shall ask no questions. You're allowed to ask, well, how lovely was your conversation with your family? You're allowed to ask, how did you pick out that beautiful outfit? But you're not allowed to ask, why did you honeymoon in a communist country? You're not allowed to ask, so how did you make best friends with the Communist Party of China and make it a personal project with your wife to take people to China, not just once or twice, but often over many, many years, and have them come visit you too? I mean, that's a degree of engagement and friendship. People can do it if they want, but it at least ought to be worthy of some questions. And oh, by the way, if you're going to get a security clearance, you get scrubbed for like the last 15 plus years of all of your travel and interactions. And they especially scrub over normal people for any interactions with foreigners, especially those from communist countries. And so why wouldn't you subject the running mate at least to a little bit of this? And it's just the media has intentionally turned off on this subject. I think it's awful. They've got to start pressing on this. China's our largest geostrategic foe. And if the vice president potential nominee is going to be a problem, we ought to know about it and talk about it.
I think that's a really good point, talking with our friend Stephen Yates, because he went, from what I understand, it was like in the 90s when he went, and Tim Walz has been there like 30 some odd times. Some of it was apparently paid for by the Chinese government. I mean, put it in perspective with all of us, because I remember when Tiananmen Square happened, I was a little kid and I was in elementary school, but I knew it was big and bad and there was some serious stuff that was happening, and nobody is untouched from the image of the Tank Man. That is like the iconic image. And I knew what that was even at a very young age. And this guy, I mean, it seemed pretty hostile in China after that. And that's the time that he chooses to go and honeymoon over there.
Well, remember, there was a popular Democrat at the time known as Bill Clinton, who ran for president in the 1992 cycle, saying that it was the butchers of Beijing. And that was after the Tiananmen Square massacre. Nancy Pelosi had just kind of settled onto the national scene, and she was very, very vocal critic of the communist government in Beijing and an advocate for human rights. The first 2 years of the Clinton administration was meant to be some kind of a course corrective away from the realist foreign policy of Bush 41 that engaged with the government of Beijing after Tiananmen, because we were still balancing the Soviet Union through the end of that enterprise. So there's a whole different world from that period. But a lot of the Democratic Party at that time would have found Walz's activities as out of the mainstream, and the likes of Nancy Pelosi wouldn't have been advocating that he be a running mate under those circumstances. She would have been eviscerating him for engaging with the butchers of Beijing back in the 1990s.
That is great context to know. That is very good context to know, because that really kind of cements just how far left Walz is when you look at these other sort of stalwarts of the party, the Clintons and, the Pelosi's, even the Bernie Sanderses. I mean, what does it tell you about, and heaven forbid, November goes sideways. What does it indicate to you the approach to China would be under a Harris-Walz administration, knowing everything seems to be so precariously perched right now as it is?
Well, under normal circumstances, I would say that a vice presidential nominee's point of view would have marginal impact. It could have some significant areas of impact, but the president will be in charge. But when you have a top of a ticket who has no opinions or policies declared at all, there's literally more donation buttons on her campaign page than there are policy papers on her campaign page. And when you have a vacuum at the top, then you have to look, well, if we know she's not going to be driving an agenda on engagement or confrontation with China, then what's this dude's impact going to be? And you'd have to go back to say, well, what did he do as governor? And what did he do before he was governor? And did he say things like, well, I don't consider them to be an adversary? Well, yes, he did. I do consider them to be an adversary. And just to echo what you led on, freaking men to J.D. Vance for saying, unleash the economic hounds on Beijing for killing Americans with fentanyl. And if you're not willing to sign up for that, then you don't have a policy. But we can't expect that from Minnesota nice.
Oh, that's a really good point. A good way of putting it. Our friend Stephen Yates, we're talking to him about all of this with the ticket, everything else. On that topic as well. Harris doesn't have. I get vibes of. I get Obama-Biden vibes, whereas Biden was added to the ticket to give this statesman gravitas because Obama was, this freshman senator out of Illinois, didn't really have much of a record. He needed some kind of weight added to it. And I'm wondering if that's sort of the approach with Harris, which then makes me think, okay, if they were elected, the tariff thing's never going to happen. There's not going to be any kind of sanctions. There's not going to be any kind of economic pushback. We're not going to be. I just think what's going to happen with Taiwan. What's going to happen with the chip production? What's going to happen with our relationship with a foe that has controls the majority of the implements used for antibiotics. We're not anywhere near self-sufficient on that or a number of other issues. So I don't know. I've been stockpiling, essentially, is what I'm saying. But what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, unfortunately, I think that the warnings are needed because if we aren't serious about revitalizing our homeland and our manufacturing and securing our supply chains, if we aren't willing to say out loud that the greater threats to America's future come from outside of our country and that our enemies are not within, as the Biden-Harris administration has declared, or on some lunacy of the weather being the greatest national security threat to the United States, we've got to, if we can't say, look, these are our challenges and this is what we'll do about it, and have the wherewithal at home, then it doesn't matter who we elect. So I think it does matter. I think that President Trump might not be all things to all people, but he proved willing to take this policy in a different direction for the 4 years he was in office. He was smarted by Beijing hitting the United States and hitting him pretty hard in the final year with the COVID virus. I think that he's got a pretty sober mind in looking at this challenge, and the Revitalize America part is right. And J.D. Vance has been very good at articulating that. If you look at Walz, I unfortunately think he's also pretty articulate, but he's articulating very dangerous and bad policies.
Ooh, so I'm very. We're gonna have to talk to you after they debate, if they have a debate, Vance and Walz, because I'm fascinated to see where you fall on with that. Because see, I do think people think that he's kind of like this dopey FUD coming from Minnesota. You know, they've been trying to, the left has been trying to say he's like the Midwestern dad because he put a hat on. You know, I didn't realize the hat was like a Midwestern dad thing, but okay. But I don't think that he's entirely innocuous. The whole weird thing that came from him. That was and the press ran with that for 2 weeks now. So he's got a level of danger.
Right. And why wouldn't it? He has spent the last 30 years engaging with the greatest manipulative political warriors on this planet, the Chinese Communist Party. They lead with information warfare. Name calling to them is not a hobby. It's a part of their warfare against their enemies. It doesn't shock me that someone who sympathizes with that part of the political spectrum would be very shrewd. And the Minnesota Nice is a facade. These are daggers. It reminds me of the movie Dune, and I'm sure I'll lose a lot of the audience on it, but where the slow blade that goes in is the one that kills. It's the one you don't see that goes slowly. And that's where this passive aggressive beta male stuff on the outside fools people. This is lethal. I think Vance knows it and he'll be ready for it. I hope the whole Trump campaign sees it and the American people see it, because there's no content. This is all about power and manipulation right now.
Last quick question. Well, it might not be quick. Last question for you, though, on this. Is Walz compromised, do you think?
Oh, for heaven's sake, yes. And so, I mean, it's compromised in the sense, is it like Hunter Biden compromised? I don't think so. But in terms of what his thoughts, beliefs, policies, inclinations are, everything that has been his style of leadership and what he has said about China is exactly what the warm mainstream bath of conventional thinking has said for the years of engagement. So I hear nothing out of him that wouldn't be most welcomed by Beijing. They'll tolerate some lip lashes from verbal assaults out of politicians when they know the substance of policies to their net advantage. Until we hit their banks and we kill the people who are trying to kill us by fentanyl or otherwise, and the Chinese are going to sit back and say, we got this.
Ooh, this is scary to watch. We're on a bumpy ride. We definitely are. Our good friend Stephen Yates, as always, at Yates Comms. I'm telling you, you got to go and check out everything that he puts up daily. I know you have a whole bunch of stuff that you do. All the links are out there at Yates Comms on X. Stephen, always good to see you. Appreciate you.
Thank you, dude.